Welcome to the Green Ring, and thanks for watching this note-by-note dissection of Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. This video is 14th in a series of 16 devoted to Die Walküre Act 1. Built on nearly 2 centuries of scholarly literature, it's a massive journey I hope you'll take with me, one I'm dedicated to finishing. For an explanation of who I am and more on the reasons for this series, please check the preface video, first in a group of 6 building a foundation to this in-depth analysis. Before diving into this video, you may want to watch the case for Erda, the case against Wotan, and the case for Loge, which present my views on how and why Wagner manipulates his musical syntax as he does, in the process identifying key morphemes which I believe define the entire work. You'll find explanations for why the terms leitmotif, motif, and motive have been replaced by morpheme, module, and cell in the chapter titled Music as Text. Links are provided in the comments below. My aim is to mount subsequent videos each week with breaks of approximately a month between each drama's acts until the entire ring is analyzed. We pick up where we left off as Sieglinde begins her part of the famed love duet, page 112 in Dover's full score. Second violins double Sieglinde's Welsung love strophe in its entirety on the words Du bist der Lenz. Firsts an octave above, joining its Erda chord notes to emphasize her lyrics' full embrace of the poem's incestuous undertones. Elided through a static hash interval, she continues into a second iteration, in place of her first module's chord notes, an ecstatic leading octave lift, both doubled and sustained by second violin's woodwind's horns, as first violins move through an obligato. This, her 4th octave so far in the act, outnumbers Siegmund's 2-1, a delicate hint of her greater importance in Erda's designs. Beneath her minim high note, again an F, first violins rise to another abandonment triad, cellos at a third below. From it she sinks to extended reverse melody notes, English horn, clarinets, French horn, extending their previous chord into an Erda chord pulse, first oboe taking rhythmically elongated melody notes from English horn to cap them with reverse chord notes, her brother's ambivalent lovemaking undilute in her response to it. Extended across 3 measures, this carries the mode back to minor, answering her lyric about the winter from which he's rescued her as winding semiquaver second violin signs entwine its last measure. She rests a dotted minim as violins violas briefly abandon signs to surge up a chain of 4 semiquaver arpeggios, first violins trading with violas as second violins move through a series of ringless distortions, the whole replete with longing, buoyed on ascending woodwind crotchet chords topped by 2 flutes abandonment triad. Doubled by woodwind second violins, Sieglinde resumes on the 3rd measure's upbeat, her 2 sensual Loge iterations lacking their terminal chord notes, as violas trade semiquaver signs with first violins, each a semiquaver off the beat, together with the minor mode a notably poignant effect to underline her text's prescient ambivalence. Dich grüßte mein Herz mit heiligem Grauen. Her second love pulse's final note, however, leads the mode back to major, while provoking another subtle alteration in the passage's overall texture, one which builds unexpected syntactic meaning. Sieglinde begins on a 6th ascent to move first through a module hinting at Welsung love, which sounds rather like a distorted ringlust reversal. Violins join her minim quaver F at a semiquaver delay, their sinuous line begun on a module expanding the Winterstürme wave, whose roots in the Walküre Act 1 prelude here resemble the Rhine Maidens' version during their exultation over the gold. Woodwinds support with chromatic melody note opposition, second oboe, clarinet bassoon rising, bass clarinet descending. Sieglinde follows with a rapturous if distorted love pulse, its initial chord notes doubled by first clarinet violas as violins sketch a giant turn, then race up an optimism pulse, the lover's sword-inspired elation only minutes before spring's advent. She then sinks in ominous prescience on a tragic fifth, violins descending through a group of 3 turns, drawn from the basic love morpheme's Freya element, a modular evolution soon to pay rich syntactic dividends. From the third of these turns, they scamper up a second optimism pulse, Erda-fueled delight bubbling through her ever more powerfully. This iteration quiets, harmony sinking again towards minor into a mood of wistful introspection. The orchestra falls silent on the next measure's downbeat for Sieglinde's a cappella spear scale parsed as 2 reverse melody note cells, the first with wonted syncopation, the second a triplet ended by a double impact. Written enharmonically, her last pitch on the next downbeat changes the key to F-sharp minor for 19 measures, a clarinet bassoon chord to sustain first violins as they answer Sieglinde with a natural semiquaver sign. Like prior viola modules launched a semiquaver off the downbeat, first violins here finish in a swift pair of love modules. This bundle falls silent on the next downbeat as she intones a second a cappella spear scale, this one closer to extended reverse melody notes, parsed as chord notes, and a reverse melody triplet capped in echoing double impact, from which she sinks an Erda fourth. The distinctive first violin sign answers, its single love pulse, this time extended on a Welterbe triad. After a crotchet rest, Sieglinde resumes with that same fourth above, a hint of the Welsung race, to conclude her oddly song-like group of phrases with her most syntactically rich strophe. The band falls silent on Sieglinde's downbeat, leaving her a cappella to intone an unmistakable retrograde of core syntax in Wotan's Rheingold inspiration, a module her brother distorts in his appeal for the god sword, precise echo of that string figure which, in Siegmund's narrative, prefaces his knighting defiance. His vocal call for the sword replaces its reverse melody notes with the Welterbe triad, while here Sieglinde repeats his prior defiance. Its juxtaposition of melody notes with their reversal echoes that mysterious giant opposing turn which haunts Wotan's Rheingold quest to defeat his foes, a cell which in Walküre acquires a sense of the Welsung's destiny opposed to the giants, as an integral part of their budding love. She distorts the module by trading its heroic rising fifth for an aching tritone, her lyrics describing a world without Siegmund, which has always been alien, fremdes, to her. This syntactic detail is among those tics so annoying to Newman, which the Meister leaves deliberately imponderable until they mature into syntactic pivots. On the next downbeat, woodwind chording resumes with her tritone's last note, first clarinet rising on melody notes as first violins echo their natural sign, capped in a love pulse, this time ended by extended reverse melody notes, another mark of Welsung racial potency which echoes through Walküre with the Welterbe triad. Woodwinds sustain her response begun on a reverse ash interval to continue through a love pulse and conclude in chord notes, met by violins surging up an elongated optimism strophe to banish her recollections of estrangement with hopes for her rescue. She moves on, describing Siegmund as the first thing familiar in her world since her childhood abduction, her incestuous focus gradually tightening. She rides a mounting wave of passion as woodwind horns pulse continuous triplet chords, while with each measure violas repeat semiquaver optimism variants, 3 quavers in length alternating with those of 6. Thus supported united violins outline of love strophe, their logae sensuality adding a gentle bite to the passage's fluctuating minor harmonies. A different coda shapes each, the first rising on extended melody notes, which Sieglinde doubles after having lingered on 3 static C sharps to sync against violins on chord notes. She follows the violin's second love pulse, calling the young hero mein eigen, on extended reverse melody notes, their terminal lift of a fourth producing an anti-barrier. During this climactic measure-long bundle, mode shifting to major, violas race up their longest optimism strophe, extended into the next measure where they sketch a fervent semiquaver down-up-down sign mixed with 2 love distortions. Atop them, the Welsung maid caps her phrase in a prescient descending fifth, its upper E a dotted minim. With her A pitch on the next downbeat, first violin triplets slide down from this partial climax in a spear-like scale, initial notes chromatically tinged. The passage could hardly be more eloquent of that parallax at the core of the Welsung twins' love, a taut bouquet of nature and Wotan in conflict for their souls. Woodwind horn pulses cease on the next measure's downbeat. Second violin's violas shifted to syncopated crotchet oscillations, the ascending harmony gradually building with the Sieglinde's vocal towards heights of ecstasy, an ardor more intense and syntactically complex even than her brother's naive enthusiasm. She begins by echoing that sensual quasi-giant turn her brother has brought to the fore. First violins answer a rising chromatic scale as cellos lift through an abandonment triad. Her next phrase, to the words "Was ich bin," outlines the most precise fate strophe yet heard, and again to cue chromatically rising violins with cello's abandonment triad. The key shifts effortlessly into sunny D-flat major on the next downbeat, as second violin's violas resume Winterstürme's oscillations, which they maintain to passage's climax. The Welsung maid lifts towards the heights of passion with an oral-visual mixed metaphor to imply that sight of her beloved equals hearing him, similes moving toward the metaphysical conundrums of Parzival. She repeats 2 Welsung joy strophes that elated Rhine maiden figure become her sibling Zeal, not coincidentally founded on the Welsung triad now associated with their race, which she likens to a natural phenomenon. Hell wie der Tag täuscht es mir auf. First violins follow each of her strophes with rising chromatic scales, cellos more hopefully underlining the first with their own Welterbe triad, while on the second truncating their abandonment triad by plunging from it on an Erde seventh. The texture markedly swells, woodwind's horn's sensuous pair of love iterations over second violin's violas rising chromatic scales, followed in the next measure by the same in first violins as cellos fall on Welterbe triads, each measure embellished by first harp's rising arpeggio with falling rising sine cap. During this climactic ascent, mode hovering around poignant minor, Sieglinde's deceptively colorless vocal hides riches. Launched by a sixth, she twice wavers on third bounces, simultaneously contradicting and replicating her brother's call for the sword, itself an echo of Wotan's Rheingold inspiration, then expands it to fourths, echoing both Welsung race and Winterstürme. On the upbeat of the last first violin scala lift, ardor swollen to its peak, the sequence expands to its greatest syntactic complexity. Audiences focus exclusively on Sieglinde's vocal, so in navigating these syntactic riches, it's best to start there. She rises an Erde fourth to descend through hyper-extended reverse melody notes, in essence a spear scale parsed as an overlapping reverse melody note through an inverted Ash interval and chord notes, an apt syntactic metaphor for the winter to which her father has condemned her, racial potency still vitally resistant as driven by the Earth Mother herself. From there, the Welsung maiden lifts a heroic rising fifth, making the whole syntactic line a courageous anti-barrier, a module steadily ratifying its association with heroic resistance. She finishes on another embryonic intimation of fate, capped after her minim crotchet high A-flat with boldly defiant reverse chord notes. Interestingly, Sieglinde's vocal consists primarily of syntax which doesn't repeat within the orchestral texture surrounding it, lacking three notable exceptions, the most prominent being reverse melody notes, her Welsung pedigree, a cell which for emphasis sounds consecutively another 3 times in the orchestra. Strings churn under the beginning of her ecstatic final declaration, with a pair of modules reminiscent of the barrier itself, whose rising portions are chromatic contradictions of her spearline, picking up on those which have dominated this last part of her arietta. Beneath them, cello's contrabasses rise on air de melody notes, from which, in the next measures, cellos sink through a Welterb triad harmonized in bassoons at a third, which then rise an abandonment triad. In the midst of this, horns echo Sieglinde's barrier, as violins sweep through that love distortion, so prominent in her early distress, sparking a climactic build through the held A-flat of her fate distortion. United violins, violas again rise in that chromatic scale, woodwinds horns sinking on reverse melody notes opposed by second bassoon's melody note strophe, which, first bassoon added, becomes a last barrier, topped by the passage's fervid anti-barrier pulse, distorted by rising on an air to seventh and capped with chord notes. This frees Sieglinde's reverse chord notes to launch on the orchestra's full crotchet rest, triggering the coda, horns woodwinds jubilating Winterstürme's initial phrase, against violins turning through the initial Freya module, capped in yet another rising scale, this one broader, its last notes alone chromatically altered as they pass through a rare high-ash interval over a harmonic shift anticipating the love duet's next phase, albeit supported ominously by first bassoon's abandonment triad. While the syntactic implications of this coda strike this writer as self-evident, its complexity merits a word. The dominance of falling spear-like lines, combined with 3 anti-barriers and a Welsung triad, is powerful evidence for Wotan's shade hovering over the maiden's joy, while mingled with sobering portents, among them Sieglinde's triumphant fate distortion. Rising chromatic scales speak eloquently of nature's influence, the barriers making them still more equivocal to Warfather's agenda. Sufficiently buried in the weaving counterpoint, abandonment triads are totally inaudible to listeners, but exist all the same, the last throwing a shadow even over spring and love. Each having enjoyed their respective ariettas, Sieglinde's notably shorter than her brother's, if far denser in syntactic interest, they begin the closest thing to a duet the strictures of opera and drama allow, meaning a series of briefer, responsive solos traded between the two vocalists. Siegmund is thus next to sing, the texture relaxing its heretofore fervid intensity as it drifts through a gentler sonic cloud's sensual throb, as the young hero expands his ravishing but vague adulation while introducing another of the work's syntactic innovations. From their ecstatic rise, violins sink pointedly through an air to seventh in an ironic chagrin pulse to announce the Welsung's initial phrase, as he introduces a morpheme first identified by Volkswagen, who comments only that it's a motif of presentiment, though of what he doesn't say. Following his lead, Kobe recognizes it and, despite its brevity, likens it to a long love kiss, then says no more. Newman dubs it bliss, Hutchison premonition, while interestingly, Cook pays it no mind. Holman sides with Newman's moniker, providing a detailed rationale based in how Wagner manipulates the cell, an opinion Donington and Sabor tacitly favor. Its plaintive rising sixth, topped by reverse chord notes, opposed after a sixth descent by their falling progenitors, go on to repeatedly intersperse this portion of their duet, heard far more often without falling sixth and chord notes. Holman feels the shorter version portrays yearning, the longer its satisfaction, which does seem to produce an ever-rising series of triumphant urgency as the module repeats in successive chains. Yet both versions are unquestionably markers of sexual zeal. It's a short-lived morpheme, sounding again after this portion of the scene only during the Act 2 prelude, then for a few moments as the Welsung twins reappear in that act, then never again. Even so, it's a potent musical idea, intensifying this passage's delicate eroticism while meshing with Walküre's more complex harmony and counterpoint, something Newman opines foreshadows the inebriated psychology of Tristan and Isolde. But in embracing their incestuous bond sexually, the pair moves ever further from the empathy Erda prizes into an exclusively self-obsessed world revolving only around themselves, each other, and their father. This narcissistic aspect of incestuous love, intensified by the physical similarity between the twins. Horn's bassoons punctuate the young hero's vocal with a triplet pulse capped in a rising third, from which English horn ascends in a kind of inverted ring fragment with subtle intimations of the curse, and finish by that same horn-bassoon mix falling a third. Taken together, the two cells hint at that third bounce in Siegmund's desperate early vocal, with its roots in Wotan's racial plans for the world, one echoed by Sieglinde near the end of her initial responsive arietta. In seeming defiance, Siegmund ascends from it on extended melody notes, English horn's gently ominous module tailing out with him on chord notes in faint echo of his prior phrase. Out of his last pitch, first violin's lute gush up a Freya arpeggio, capped in that grace turn reminiscent of the giants. English horn, clarinet following suit canonically, first flute sinking through them from this high point of ecstasy on a chromatic scale. The Meister seduces an audience in exactly the way the Welsung twins are enticed, for the by no means subtle tussle between conflicting worldviews reverberates throughout this superficially benign love scene thanks to syntax wound around sexuality, race, incest, and nature. The pair of bassoon-horn triplet chording bundles in Siegmund's lyric expand with Sieglinde's response to a constant back and forth, third clarinet added, strophes traded with each measure to create rocking thirds, viola-fingered tremolos adding gentle frisson to only the reed triplets. Doubled in second violins, Sieglinde meets her brother's soothing passion with a pair of his full bliss modules. First flute clarinet tail each of her strophes with calm, falling quaver arpeggios, for all the world like Albrecht's ring fragment evolution, implying the Nibelung race's potential mortal threat, lurking even in this idyll. The act's narrative logic explains this oddly inappropriate syntax, since the Welsung twins lie under Hunding's threat, a Nibelung hybrid, his notable vocal morpheme a ring fragment. Here softened to a caress, the Meister hints this lover's bond might also break the Nibelung's potential stranglehold on the mortal world, the Welsung's main use to Wotan their potential seizure of the ring, thus driving a stake through Albrecht's hopes. Erda's shadow constantly flickers over this heady mix, her chord notes and their reverses, along with rising extended melody notes, Freya's morpheme, and giant turns, suggesting she impels the pair towards some mysterious resolution of the god-giant Nibelung quandary. Horn woodwind pulses continuing with viola tremolos, the harmony moves from its aching seventh mode into sunny major, as, still doubled by second violins, Sieglinde follows two strophes of the full bliss morpheme by turning it paradoxically on its head, following its sixth ascent with Erda chord notes, and, after a fourth descent, their reverse. Resuming a third above, she lifts on another fourth, meaning through first inversion heroic melody notes into extended reverse melody notes. With these early marks of her focus shifting gradually from sensuality to revelation, woodwinds trade a pair of lush fragment distortions which end by returning the mode to its aching seventh harmony. Second violins throb another bliss strophe, banishing the fragment, Sieglinde joining them for 3 additional pulses, harmony growing slightly more pained, the last viola tremolos and horn triplets filling a measure which adds urgency to its slight crescendo. With her next measures, 3 static crotchets, unbroken static triplet pulses devolve to woodwinds alone, while second violin's first clarinet intone the chromatic love module with its flavor of Loge's sensual fire. In the next measure, she doubles their second love pulse, her concluding anti-barrier doubled by clarinet alone, sign of Wotan's plan to reverse his woes, here rising on a sixth to echo that interval's prominence in bliss, when she caps more equivocally with a double impact. Tanner's view of this love duet is especially relevant at this juncture. Sigmund is intent on lyrical outpouring, while it is Sieglinde who wants to move things along, to find out who he really is, who his father was, what is the source of the overpowering attraction which they feel for one another. I mean that is characteristic of Wagner's men and women. The woman leads the way, the man rhapsodizes. Her lyric during this last passage begins to hint at Tanner's point. O lass ihn näher zu dir mich neigen, das hell ich schaue. More insistent as their exchange continues, her urge jibes with the myths, its reckless blundering Siegmund so different from his sister's cool calculation and steely resolve. This dynamic plays out in ways both interesting and probingly insightful in the drama's remainder, with special focus on its incest element, of which more anon. Siegmund's response is just that sort of airy lyrical outpouring Tanner notes, its syntax drawing his twin further into the sequence's dangerously seductive blend of sexuality and race. Key change to E-flat, horns fall out, woodwind triplets continuing on each measure's first beat as augmented by second violins, viola tremolos answer by filling the last 2 beats. First violins move with them through a pair of complete bliss strophes, followed by 4 of its shortened variant as he praises her beauty in the moonlight, a facile portrait of no more than her physical self. Divorced from bliss, his vocal etches her racially with 2 Welterb triads, the second phrased as that Welsung joy bounce, from this point forward solely a mark of demigod vitality. Not coincidentally, these triads echo each full bliss iteration, synchronized at a parallax with 2 flute clarinet ring fragment elongations, subtle reminder of how closely these 2 inimical racial struggles intertwine. With first violin's quartet of shortened bliss strophes, the flute clarinet fragment cell inverts atop their reverse chord note strophes to become rising 3-note quaver arpeggios. Difficult to hear in its low register, the first is an abandonment triad, the remaining 3 confident heroic melody note variants, to buoy Siegmund's lift on a scale parsed as 3 hopeful reverse chord note strophes through each measure. Sinking from the last on an air to fourth, the phrase concludes with a chagrin pulse, its sense of unexpected realization hinting the young hero's otherwise tepid lyric intuits what Sieglinde has already begun to grasp. For the next 2 wordless measures, woodwind triplet pulses sound continuously, with violin-viola tremolos, as first violins trace a chromatic scale, rising in quavers towards climax as the last flute-clarinet quaver arpeggio lifts into a heroic melody note variant, capped by a crotchet Welterb triad. Like his sister before him, Siegmund answers this urge on a pair of yearning chromatic love cells, doubled by second violins, violas, woodwind triplet pulses continuing through a diminuendo. Perhaps these ill-starred lovers' natural purity has some chance to overcome Wotan's unseen manipulations of their race for his own selfish ends. But this illusion is wiped away in gently sweet fashion, key changing to bright C major, that tonality per Darcy and Macrelis closely associated with the sword and Wotan's plans, the passage's syntax culminating the heroic melody note evolution to their reversals, both modules repeated numerous times during the prior love music. These first measures have roused the interest of several early analysts, Volkswagen being the first to associate them with Bliss by including both modules in a single example, commenting they're related without explaining why this should be. Kobe follows his lead, as does Newman, by providing musical examples, but, like Volkswagen, giving no syntactic rationale. Volkswagen refers to Bliss and those elements of the present modular bundle he recognizes collectively as a motif of presentiment, while Kobe opines only that the current syntax is a caressing phrase, and Newman, a rapturous cadence that prolongs its dying fall through voices and orchestra. No subsequent commentary has taken any notice of this brief, seemingly inconsequential passage, but such early attention suggests there's something here worth examining in more detail, which indeed there is. Siegmund begins this love cadence with the rising octave, his next as Act 1 concludes, the antepenultimate he sings for the remainder of Walküre, meaning the rest of his life. The Welsung progresses through a unique trio of cells, the first distorting retrograde heroic melody notes, the second a Welsung triad, violins syncing with his third through a pair of love cadence strophes. The three early analysts' examples include his more leisurely Freya Part 1 strophe without noting its close link to the Welsung twins' empathetic bond. Siegmund thus reveals that syntax's influence on his previous two cells, a resemblance the woodwind chording's rough doubling reinforces. These also strengthen the heroic melody note association. High woodwind's first pulse, retrograde, their second inverted, opposing bassoons moving through first inversion and original. In the next two measures, cellos lift through a giant-like arpeggio as horns take the syntax by first echoing bassoon's heroic melody notes, then an abandonment triad, violas the melody note's first inversion. Once Siegmund falls silent, flutes, clarinets breathe another pair of love cadence modules. This Welsung love cadence barely recurs, twice here in Act 1 and once in Siegfried, yet its syntactic riches include the love module and successions of heroic melody note variants, arpeggios both rising and falling prefigured in Sieglinde's personal morpheme, Siegmund's drink of water, and only recently to surround the bliss morpheme. The passage also encompasses persistent Welsung joy repetitions, drawn from the Rhine Frolics, which has several times informed the young hero's vocal during this love music, complete with its Welterb triad. As octavo low strings take over the triplet rhythm in static pulses, the clarinet arpeggio sinks through a disjointed ring fragment strophe, a cell taking on added weight in the next measure as Sieglinde replies to Siegmund, closer examination inching her ever nearer to their co-sanguinity. Low strings maintain their static triplet minim pulses throughout this beguiling syntax, as second violins, violas ominously pick up the ring fragment, complete with overlapping Welterb triads. Then, alternating with bassoons doubling clarinets, transform the fragment into Welsung triads by shifting their final two notes, the first woodwind strophe falling through chord notes, strings next pulse through a fourth. The subsequent two clarinet bassoon iterations both lift on reverse chord notes, a design bringing them closer to the love cadence's backbone modules, despite an interstitial string pulse of another ring fragment with its Welsung triads, the Nibelung racial imperative outflanked by Welsungs. For the ear, however, first violins take precedence, a bliss strophe per measure, though the fourth trades its reverse melody notes for their originals. The Welsung maiden's vocal follows a different path, if with equally lush syntax, her natural purity rising on melody notes into a sixth bounce, a tenderer echo of her brother's Welsung bounce, completed in reverse chord notes. After a quaver rest, her next phrase of extended melody notes spurs first violin's sole bliss deviation, its reverse replaced by original chord notes to echo her earlier vocal. This moves her into more prominent syntax, her next set of melody notes followed by that joyful module with its Welsung triad backbone. In answer, first violins resume their wonted bliss pulses, in turn sparking second violins' violas into their final ring fragment, clarinet's bassoons meeting it with the last Welsung triad, while she doubles the next first violin bliss strophe. Conductors give stage to the interplay of Sieglinde's vocal and first violin's bliss pulses, orchestral lines understandably treated as harmonic support. No analyst identifies either ring fragment or Welsung triad as part of the work's syntactic evolutions, yet these modules illuminate the passage's deep subtext, inextricably linking the Welsung's growing sense of their familial bond to the dire threat looming over them, why their race was spawned, and the force behind their meeting. As innocents blind to a conflict among beings they'll never know, Wagner's twins could hardly be more dissimilar to their mythic counterparts, all of whom fully understand the vendetta in which they're embroiled. After a last bliss iteration, Sieglinde concludes this episode on chromatic extended melody notes, their harmonies stressed with brief urgency, first violins doubling her first bliss strophe to augment her melody notes with that module's second iteration, while second violin's violas intone the love cadence's resolution. This sonic mark of the Welsung maiden teetering at realization's precipice dovetails into a passage effectively closing the love music. That's it for now. My aim is to keep these videos close to a half hour instead of the longer ones, which make far too much of an endurance test. The next video picks up where this one leaves off, Sieglinde teetering on the edge of realizing who her Welsung swain really is. Top stave at page 130 in Dover's full score. As always, thanks for watching and please do leave your comments below. Time and energy allowing, I'll do everything I can to respond. Lastly, as all YouTubers know, your subscription to this channel by itself is a huge assist in completing this vast project. Ring the bell to be notified of the next videos. With luck and your support, there's a lot more to come.